Arsene Wenger speaks to Mike Dean during Arsenal's game against West Brom. Arsenal manager Arsene Wenger questioned referee Mike Dean's honesty and called him a disgrace during an angry exchange after last month's 1-1 draw against West Bromwich Albion. It has been revealed Wenger received a 3-match touchline ban after he admitted questioning the integrity of the referee in the match officials' changing room. In written reasons published by the Football Association, Dean's match report states, "As we've entered the dressing room after the game, Mr. Wenger stood behind us in the doorway and told the West Brom steward to let him in. He was very aggressive, leaning towards me, pointing aggressively at me, saying, 'You're not honest,' on numerous occasions. I replied, 'So you're calling me a cheat?' He replied, 'I maintain what I say. You're not honest.' He then said, 'You've done this to us many times before. You're supposed to be professional. You're a disgrace.' He was then ushered out of the room by the West Brom safety officer." Quote, West Brom 1-1 Arsenal. West Brom 1-1 Arsenal. Dean's version of events was supported by the other match officials. Assistant referee Ian Husson wrote, "Upon entering the referee's dressing room, Mr. Wenger followed ourselves and was standing in the doorway and said to the West Bromwich Albion stewards to let me in. Mr. Wenger was aggressively leaning towards Mr. Dean, pointing at him and saying, 'You're not honest,' several times. Mr. Dean replied saying, 'So you're calling me a cheat?' Single quote. Mr. Wenger replied, 'I maintain what I say. You're not honest.' Mr. Wenger further commented saying, 'You've done this to us many times before. You're supposed to be professional. You're a disgrace.' Mr. Wenger was then escorted away from the dressing room by the West Bromwich Albion safety officer. Assistant referee Simon Long wrote, "At the conclusion of the match, we entered our dressing room, immediately followed by Mr. Wenger, the manager of Arsenal. He stood in the dressing room doorway, preventing the West Bromwich Albion stewards from closing the door, whilst demanding, 'Let me in.' Mr. Wenger took a step inside the dressing room and aggressively confronted the referee, Mr. Dean, leaning towards him and continuously jabbing his finger towards his chest whilst repeatedly saying, 'You're not honest,' in a raised voice. Mr. Dean responded by stating, 'So you're calling me a cheat?' Single quote. To which Mr. Wenger responded, 'I maintain what I say.' Mr. Wenger continued his aggressive tone and went on to say, 'You've done this to us many times before. You're supposed to be professional. You're a disgrace.' Mr. Wenger was then ushered out of the dressing room by the safety officer of West Bromwich Albion, who closed the door behind Mr. Wenger. Christopher Kavanagh, the fourth official, said, "As we entered the dressing room after the final whistle, Mr. Wenger appeared in the doorway telling the stewards to let him in. As he entered, his body language was very aggressive. He started pointing at the referee and shouting, 'You are not honest,' continuously. Mr. Dean replied, 'So you're calling me a cheat?' Mr. Wenger replied, 'I maintain what I say. You are not honest.' He continued, 'You are supposed to be a professional referee. You are a disgrace.' Mr. Dean then asked Mr. Wenger to leave the dressing room and was ushered out the door. An independent panel, chaired by Gareth Farrelly, unanimously agreed on a 3-match ban. After considering a 4-match suspension, the commission stated, 'There is simply no justification for this behavior.' Quote, the panel considered a full stadium ban but agreed it was not warranted in this case. Wenger sat in the stands for this month's games against Nottingham Forest, Chelsea and Bournemouth. He was also fined £40,000